When the first Sakura Wars was released in 1996, it was a surprising hit. Sega wasted no time capitalizing on its popularity, pumping out all kinds of merchandise and producing OVAs to accompany the main game. With the advent of the live stage show series in 1997, which, I should add, continues to this day, Sakura Wars had cemented itself as a phenomenon in Japan, topping popularity polls well after its release. After a few detours, including the first column spin-off and several fan discs, which were essentially digital fan club newsletters pressed onto Saturn discs, some even featuring warning labels reading, "This is not a game," it was finally time for a proper follow-up. The world was finally graced with Sakura Wars 2, Thou Shalt Not Die, on April 4th, 1998. It, along with Deep Fear and the Sega Sanshiro game, would be among the last major first-party releases for the Saturn before the company would focus their efforts on the Dreamcast, set to release later that year in Japan. As a result, the game would go on to be the Saturn's swan song, the final crowning achievement for the system. As a quick reminder, in an effort to be consistent across the board, I'm sticking as close as I can to the PS4 game's localization of shared names and terminology. So, for example, Teikoku Kagekidan is the Imperial Combat Review, etc. As for everything else, my personal translations of certain terms and names might differ from other sources, such as the English releases of the manga or anime, or any potential fan translation projects that might happen in the future. I say potential because, as of this recording, there is no English fan translation for Sakura Wars 2. Like my last video, this video is also something of an abridged Let's Play, in addition to an in-depth analysis and review. So, hopefully, this will tide you over until that day comes. Yes, that means I will be going into deep, deep spoiler territory. Assuming that, by the time you're watching this, a fan translation does exist, or better yet, an official English localization, then by all means, if ever at any point during this you feel like you might want to play it yourself, then feel free to stop watching and go check it out. Alright, so, Sakura Wars 1? It's a pretty good game. Sakura Wars 2?
Good! Great! Awesome! Outstanding! Amazing!
Everything that was good in Sakura Wars 1 gets polished to a mere sheen in 2. The game is even bigger than before, spanning 3 discs instead of just 2. The graphics are all redrawn with much cleaner art and a wider variety of character portraits in the adventure part, along with a much more vibrant UI in combat and full 3D animations for super moves. The combat itself is further refined too, with thoughtful balance changes and new mechanics that would go on to define the series for years to come. The writing is tightened up significantly, and while still not perfect, the antagonists are much more compelling, and the story is packed full of genuinely gripping set pieces and emotional moments, alongside the lighthearted goofs you'd come to expect. On top of that, there's an even greater number of exclusive scenes and dialogues for your chosen love interest. The very first thing you're likely to notice, though, is the music, starting with the game's opening theme song. The first time I started the game up, I had no idea what to expect. I liked the opening theme of the first game so much, I was afraid whatever this game would have just wouldn't stack up. However, not even 2 seconds in, my fears would be assuaged. Yes, not only did they bring back the theme song, but somehow they actually made it even better. For starters, each verse is performed by a different member of the review. Disc 1's verse is sung by Sakura. Disc 2's is sung by Sumire. And Disc 3's might be my favorite, where it's the first game's Disc 1 verse sung with an incredible intensity by Maria. During this, we get to see some absolutely fantastic animation, courtesy of Production IG. These cutscenes may be super compressed, but just look at those Sakuga frames. Mwah. Then the chorus plays, with all the Flower Division members joining in, as we get to see them all in action. Maybe it's the video compression on the Saturn doing the heavy lifting here, but even the CG has aged remarkably well, with all the mech action having a tangible weight to it, and actually doing a decent job of meshing with the cell animation. Whereas the first game's intro sequence was upbeat and catchy, the Sakura Wars 2 intro gets me hyped as shit, and is a perfect tone setter for the enhancements this game has to offer. Even putting aside the new and improved opening theme song, the rest of the music gets a huge upgrade too, with a bunch of new compositions that arguably outshine the last game's music, as well as a few new renditions of old favorites. Of the new compositions, I particularly like the new daytime theater theme. Whereas the first game's version had an imminent wacky hijinks kind of mood, this game's version is very chill, with a distinct lazy afternoon kind of vibe that's just oh so cozy, incorporating motifs from both the first game's theater music and the theme song. The new default battle theme is fantastic too. The composer of the entire series, the first two games included, is one Kohei Tanaka. He's had a stunning career outside of this franchise, having composed for a metric ton of other famous works, including the One Piece anime and the Gravity Rush games, among many others. But in my humble opinion, his work on Sakura Wars 2 ranks among his very best. Anyhow, our story begins in the spring of 1925, year 14 of the Taisho era. 1 year after the end of Sakura Wars 1, we see a mysterious masked figure performing some kind of ritual and... Oh Christ, he's back? Already? Sure, it's been a year, but if you were to play this back-to-back with the first game, dude's only been dead for like 20 minutes, tops. Well, occult resurrections aside, there have been no demonic incidents of any kind in Tokyo in the aftermath of the Seima Castle crisis. As a result, Imperial Navy Ensign Ichiro Ogami, captain of the Imperial Combat Review's Flower Division, has returned to active duty in the Navy. After a tour off the coast of South America, he's back in Tokyo, and his old boss, Lieutenant General Iki Yoneda, has invited him out to lunch aboard a yakatabune, a fancy Japanese dining boat. After a little catching up, Yoneda breaks the news to Ogami. The Flower Division needs him back, and arrangements have already been made with the Navy to allow his return to the review. Yoneda then asks Ogami if there's anybody in the Flower Division in particular he has strong feelings for. As luck would have it, whoever Ogami picks just so happens to be waiting for him outside. Of course, you all know what that means. Koran greets Ogami and is overjoyed to see him again after so long.
ほんまに大神はんや。これは夢やないんやな。
However, the reunion is fleeting because she, too, has been transferred out of the Flower Division for the time being, so she can't stay long. She escorts Ogami to the review's headquarters, the Grand Imperial Theater, before saying goodbye, promising to be back with the Flower Division by summer once her work at the Hanayashiki branch is wrapped up. She mentions she's left a present for Ogami in his room, and off she goes. Immediately upon entering the theater, Ogami has a heartfelt reunion with Sakura and Iris, but the others are nowhere to be found. See, while Koran's back at Hanayashiki, Maria's on assignment in New York, Sumire's staying with her folks, not entirely of her own free will, and Kana, naturally, has gone back to Okinawa to train some more. That means the only ones who stayed behind to keep an eye on the theater are Sakura and Iris. Yoneda catches up and tells Ogami to report to his office at noon before leaving him to his own devices. Now that we've been given plenty of time to explore, we can see the theater's undergone a massive renovation in the past year. Some rooms have completely different layouts, several new rooms have been added, such as the music room and game room, and now we can actually enter the central courtyard and the attic. If you've already played the PS4 Sakura Wars game, this is the layout you're probably already familiar with, minus the game room and the attic. That said, there still don't seem to be any restrooms though, so Just try to hold it in. During all this, you may have noticed a clock at the top corner of the map screen. It might look scary and intimidating, as though you've suddenly been slapped with a time limit. But no, this is actually a very good thing, and arguably the single best change to the gameplay made in Sakura Wars 2. In the first game's adventure parts, you'd wander around and talk to people at your own pace until suddenly the game decided you were done and moved you along to the next plot point. It was nearly impossible to plan around, and at its worst, made every interaction feel like a gamble when it really shouldn't have. Now, in the sequel and beyond, we have this little clock up here telling us the time. However, the minutes don't pass in real time, but rather, it's a representation of your action limit per adventure part. Usually you'll be told to meet someone or go somewhere specific at a certain time, and until then, you're free to do whatever. Every interaction counts as 5 minutes on the clock, with some minor exceptions, despite however long it might actually take in real time. And once the clock strikes the designated hour, you'll be railroaded into the next plot point. This new system gives you everything you need to plan your time and hit up all the places you want to without ever feeling like the rug is being pulled out from under you. It's a massive improvement. Every mainline entry going forward keeps this time management system up until the soft reboot on PS4. That game does away with action limits entirely, letting you do every single thing available to you before you decide to continue with the story on your own terms. While some people might prefer that degree of freedom, I feel like it kind of cheapens the experience. I'll get into it in more detail when I eventually talk about that game in like 3 years or whatever. As you walk around, you may notice the theater isn't the only thing that's gotten a new coat of paint, as the lip system has received its own fair share of updates as well. First, you may have noticed a little pink and blue bar at the bottom right of the screen. This is the personality meter, with the blue representing a straight-laced, serious personality, and the pink representing a comical, laid-back personality. Serious or straightforward choices will fill the bar up with more blue, and lighthearted, jokey, or flirty choices will fill up the pink bar. Some choices change depending on which side you lean closer to, and characters will react more strongly to certain choices if your personality is close in line with theirs. However, as the game itself tells you, don't stress over it too much, because the personality system's effect on conversations and relationships is ultimately pretty negligible. I mean, I'm glad they don't force you into it. Like, just cause Koran likes comedy doesn't mean I should be forced to become the Joker to get with her. But it's kind of pointless as a result, and so they never brought the system back in any subsequent entry in the series. A far more fundamental change, though, and one that did stick around, is the introduction of timing lips prompts. These are special lips prompts where, once half the time limit has elapsed, your options will slightly change. You might gain a new option, you might lose options, and some options might get replaced, giving you different results than if you had answered right away. That's not it though, because we have yet another new lips edition called Click Lips. In these segments, a timer will show up around the edge of the screen as you attempt to accomplish a specific task with multiple actions, be they multiple consecutive lips prompts or environmental interactions. Considering not all Click Lips prompts actually involve clicking, maybe they should have called these timing lips prompts. But then, what would you call the other kind? And it's not like regular lips prompts don't already involve timing anyway. So... Well, anyway, moving on, there's one more big change, and this one's not visible so much as it is audible. Now, there are multiple degrees of response to your choices. There's your standard happy and sad jingles, same as before. But now there are longer jingles for if the other person really liked your choice,
えらい大胆なセリフやね。
or if they fucking hated it.
大神さん。
As you might expect, these indicate greater gains and losses of trust than the standard jingles, and they go a long way in adding more emotional weight to the choices you make. Finally, there's the introduction of chain events. These are consecutive conversation sequences that span multiple chapters, which must be completed in order without missing any parts. The only reward for these is more trust level boosts, but they all contain really fun character moments, so they're definitely worth pursuing. They all do a great job of evoking that feeling of hanging out with friends and casually shooting the shit. I just wish the game wasn't so strict about missing out on parts. Noon comes around and Ogami is once again issued his usher uniform, cementing his return to the review. Once he's gotten changed, Sakura and Iris reveal they've been planning a welcoming party in secret this whole time, and bring Ogami to the dressing room to commence the festivities. It's there that Yoneda reveals Ogami isn't the only arrival today, as the Flower Division has recruited a brand new member to its ranks. Meet Orihime Soletta.
ちゃお、ソレッタ織姫です。よろしくお願いします。
A half-Japanese, half-Italian actress of international renown. Heiress to an aristocratic family known throughout Europe as the Red Nobles. Whereas all the other members of foreign origin within the Flower Division, that is, Maria, Iris, and Koran, speak perfect Japanese, what's particularly noteworthy about Orihime is that she's the only one on the whole team who speaks with a distinct foreign accent and occasionally stilted speech, peppering her dialogue with Italian words on occasion, and English words even more frequently for whatever reason. This makes a certain degree of sense though, because despite her origins, Orihime has a profound disdain for Japanese things, particularly Japanese men, for reasons we'll get into sometime later.
I'll never forgive the Japanese!
If you thought Sumire made a bad first impression, then hoo boy. I couldn't stand Orihime when I first met her. She's ruder, snarkier, and more obstinate than even Sumire. But now I kinda love her for it? Seriously, she's a total goblin, but she's such a fun character in the long run. At first, I was a little concerned about how the writers would handle having both her and Sumire on the team, since there's a fair amount of overlap between the two, but they do a great job of distinguishing them. As I mentioned though, it took me a while to warm up to her, cause what you see right off the bat is, shall we say, less than pleasant, as evidenced when Ogami just tries to get along with Orihime, and she suddenly leaves the party in a huff, to the bewilderment of everyone there. Later that night, Ogami is in his room when he hears a mysterious ringing noise. It's coming from a strange wooden box, and it turns out it's a call from Koran. Not just any call, but a video call. Remember that present Koran mentioned? It was this weird box, a device called a kinematron, a steam-powered video phone of Koran's own invention. That's right, your girl invented video chat in the 1920s. Steam-powered video chat, no less. And no, it doesn't explode. What's more, it can connect to any other kinematron owner around the world, entirely over radio. Who are these other kinematron owners, you ask? Why, none other than the presently absent members of the Flower Division, of course. And not only that, but the kinematron can also connect to multiple people at once. So yeah, Koran also invented video conferencing. See why she's the best. This lets everyone have a happy reunion together. And until they all come back, the kinematron will be your main means of communicating with the absent members. You can access the kinematron in Ogami's room at any time during a free roam adventure part, and use it to call anybody who's not there at the theater. So even if your favorite hasn't moved back in yet, this should tide you over until they do. You can also use the kinematron as a normal radio, tuning into a number of different stations, including one featuring a radio drama series about a masked hero named Shonen Red. And I gotta say, whoever's singing the theme song sounds very familiar. The next day, Sakura and Orihime get into a fight during a rehearsal for an upcoming play.
Do you ever have deja vu, Mrs. Lancaster?
Sakura wants to practice her lines with Orihime, who is having none of it, saying she doesn't need to practice her lines. Like, at all. Fucking whatever, lady, you're the famous actress, not me. She then says she's had enough and decides to go home. As in, back to Italy. Ogami tries to get her to stay, but before the conversation goes on much longer, the alarm rings. After a brief year of peace, Tokyo is once again under attack. Orihime puts her plans to return home on hold and agrees to join the fight, but just this once. Once the Flower Division has arrived at the command center, Yoneda reveals the attack is just outside their door, and the enemy's likely target is the theater itself. He then takes the opportunity to show off the team's new spherical armors. Gone are the Jinbu from the end of the first game, instead replaced with new, souped-up versions of the older Kobu units, these ones being named Kobu Kai. Except for Orihime, that is. You probably noticed how her uniform looks different from everyone else's, right? And that's because Orihime was formerly part of a different unit called the Star Division, an attempt at creating an anti-demon strike team in Europe, predating the foundation of the Imperial Combat Review and the Flower Division. They didn't use Kobu either, but rather their own unique spherical armors named Eisenkleid, which Orihime continues to use even now. Orihime, in very Orihime fashion, runs off to the battlefield ahead of everyone else, refusing to wait up. Tokyo's Ginza district, home of the Grand Imperial Theater, is being terrorized by a group of all too familiar mechanoids, the Wakiji-class muscle Kihei drones. Orihime's already gotten a head start on fighting them, making her isolated from the rest of the group as the game's first combat mission begins. Aside from the immediately apparent updates made to the UI, there's also been a load of additions and changes made to the gameplay systems here, resulting in a much more engaging and, dare I say it, strategic experience.
This is big brain time.
For starters, your 8 ally shield uses from the first game have been reduced to 3 in this game, meaning you can't use it as a crutch quite as much this time around, though you still get all the associated perks. Next, there have been some smart feature additions, such as a mini-map you can toggle on and off, whose visible grid makes it much easier to count out spaces and plan your moves. Following that, critical hit chances from the first game have been replaced by a tag team system, where if you have 2 units in close proximity, there's a random chance that one will follow up on the other's attack. Perhaps the most fundamental change, and one that would go on to be a defining feature of the series on par with the LIP system, is the Captain system. During Ogami's turn, you can access the Captain menu and switch between one of 4 different battle strategies, which affects the stats of every unit on your team. The default is the Forest strategy, the neutral option with no stat changes. Then you have the Wind strategy, which increases your movement range at the expense of your defense stat. This is a handy one to have on big maps in particular. After that is the Fire strategy, which increases your attack stat at the expense of your defense stat. This is perfect for quickly mopping up weaker enemies, but it can be quite risky in large encounters and boss fights. Finally, there's the Mountain strategy, which increases your defense at the expense of your movement range. It's perfect if you, like me, have a very careful and painfully slow playstyle. The Captain system is a well-considered, robust mechanic that makes fights much more mentally stimulating. Ah, but what would a Sakura Wars game be if you couldn't break the mechanics somehow? You see, so long as it's Ogami's turn, you can change your team's tactics at any time, and as many times as you want. Yes, even between his 2 actions, meaning this system effectively makes Ogami a god on the battlefield. Unlike how easily abusable the shield command was in the first game and how it got nerfed right away, this exploit was never fixed in any of the sequels featuring this system either. Finally, perhaps the most important combat change of them all, we've been graced with the glory of the undo button. Yes, if you miscalculated and moved to a tile where you can't reach the enemy, you can undo that move action, so long as you don't perform any other action beforehand. It's a small change that makes all the difference between victory and a costly blunder. A true lifesaver. As for Orihime herself, she's similar to Iris in that she can attack every enemy in a fixed radius around her, but what sets her apart is that she has a slightly longer range than Iris, at the expense of not being able to target any enemy directly adjacent to her. Close combat is literally impossible for her unless she uses her super, which, unlike Iris' super, is an actual attack and not a group heal. Speaking of which, Iris' super move now heals Iris herself, as well as the other units in range. With all the riffraff taken care of, the boss makes his appearance, and, try to act surprised, it's none other than Satan, the primary antagonist of the last game, freshly resurrected.
反言の術によって我は再び蘇った。
Orihime is like, this guy ain't shit, until Satan cuts her a fat slice of humble pie. He's about to finish her off before Ogami comes in with the save, telling her that even if she hates his guts, he still values her as a member of the team. This causes an ever so slight change of heart in Orihime, who is now more willing to fight alongside the rest of the team, in what is the game's first boss battle. Satan summons a couple of ads on the field, but it's safe to ignore most of them if you switch to fire mode to try to take Satan down as quickly as possible. Satan's counterattack will hit pretty hard even if you're guarding, but nevertheless, he should go down in about 2 turns this way. Even though Satan coming back from the dead so soon should make me roll my eyes, this is actually one of my favorite tropes in fiction. The final boss of a past installment coming back and getting fucking obliterated almost immediately, just to show how much stronger the main cast have become. Satan's mech blows up, the team strike their first victory pose in over a year, and Orihime's having none of it. Satan's not quite dead yet, though, and warns the Flower Division that they risk becoming the very things they hate. It's at that moment that Yoneda finally recognizes Satan as being none other than his old lost comrade, Shinosuke Yamazaki. You probably thought I forgot to follow up on that last time, but no, the game sort of forgot. In all fairness, Yoneda's the only one of them who ever knew Yamazaki, and this is the first time he's ever gotten a good look at Satan, so I guess this makes sense. Yamazaki then claims that Tokyo is cursed, and that though he may die, this curse shall remain.
We are laughing.
His gloating gets cut short as the mysterious figure from the beginning shows up to expedite the process and kill Yamazaki where he stands. He takes Yamazaki's sword and tells the Flower Division his name before he disappears. The Flower Division are shaken by this turn of events, except for Orihime, who's just like, hey, fuck 'em, we won, let's celebrate. And so, the Flower Division go out on a cherry blossom viewing picnic, making up for the squandered welcoming party from the day before. Orihime agrees to stay with the review in Japan after all, though clarifying that she still hates Ogami's Japanese ass. Can't win them all, I guess. Now, before we continue on to Chapter 2, I'd like to draw your attention to this new addition to the iCatch screen, your battle rankings. At the end of every battle, you'll be graded based on how many of your team members made it out of the battle without getting knocked out. If you pass a certain threshold, something special happens at the end, which I'll go over once we get there. Just keep this in the back of your mind. Chapter 2 opens with Ogami getting called into the command center by Yoneda. After a quick heart-to-heart where Ogami consoles Yoneda over his survivor's guilt, Yoneda reveals the Flower Division is getting yet another new recruit among its ranks. Ogami tells this to the others, and Sakura and Iris suggest they throw another welcoming party for the new member. Iris insists on tagging along with Ogami, and as they're getting ready, they run into a mysterious woman near the theater's VIP entrance, asking if she's in the right place.
大帝国劇場というのはこちらでよろしいの?
She thanks Ogami for his help with a kiss, and acts overly familiar with him right off the bat, damn near threatening to jump his bones right on the spot. But Ogami declines. The mystery woman takes off, and Iris and Ogami are left equally dumbfounded. Once all the preparations for the party have been made, the two of them go up to the terrace in order to surprise the new recruit. They get caught up in small talk and miss their cue, leading Iris to rush downstairs, sliding down the banister. She is caught by none other than the new recruit, Reni Midstrasse. Reni is a bona fide German Wunderkind, a prodigy on the battlefield, and, like Orihime, is a former member of the Star Division, piloting an Eisenkite instead of a Kobu. Reni is a man of few words, acting with a nearly robotic demeanor.
Hi.
Yes, I said man, because apparently Reni's a boy. This comes as a surprise to everyone there, since, as mentioned in the last video, women are far more likely to have the spirit power needed to pilot spherical armor. Just as soon as Reni's introduced himself, he attempts to leave, opting to just sit in his room until he receives his orders, but the gang insist he attend his own welcoming party, and practically drag him there. As it turns out though, there is one more new recruit to the review, who turns out to be none other than the weird sex lady from before. Her name is Saki Kageyama, and...
大神さんってずいぶん手が早いんですね.
But you weren't even... This is exactly the kind of shit I was talking about before. God damn it! At any rate, the party doesn't last long before the alarm rings, and with it comes a dramatic transformation in Reni's demeanor. Now, as you've probably noticed, Reni is, to put it very mildly, emotionally stunted. He's usually fairly placid, if seemingly unfeeling, but once it's time for battle, he immediately shifts into attack mode, demanding a full sitrep and where he can find his combat gear. His outlook on the battlefield is equally robotic and calculated, as evidenced when Ogami tells him keeping the citizenry safe is their mission, and Reni counters by saying victory is their #1 priority, above all else. While we're on the subject of battle, it's here that the game introduces one last wrinkle to the combat missions. Starting with Chapter 2, most combat missions will let you pick your victory condition. The first instance is basic enough, letting you choose between an offensive or defensive battle plan. But future battles can sometimes vary wildly depending on your choice of victory condition. It's a really neat change that gives the game a level of replay value absent from the last one. This time around, Ugui Sudani is under attack, and we're going for an offensive battle. Upon the Flower Division's arrival, they meet two new villainous faces, the beefy brawler Kongo
こっちかいご領収筆頭今後
and the scheming strategist Mokujiki.
そう生きり立つな今後何も知らずに殺すのは運命とはいえ忍びない
who make up 2 of the 5 generals of our new antagonist group, Kokikai, or the Black Oni Council. Now, I bet a lot of you are getting a distinct feeling of déjà vu at this point. Hearing that name, you'd be forgiven for thinking they're just carbon copies of the prior game's Black Hive Council. I'll discuss it in more detail in a bit, but for now, rest assured that this is not the case. Far from it. Just consider the name choice a cinematic parallel.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Anyhow, the 2 of them are talking about what hot shit they are until Mokujiki suddenly gets jumped by none other than Reni. Mokujiki retreats, and after some assistance from the Flying Whale, we're ready to begin our assault on the enemy forces. The map is divided into 2 lanes, with rows of turrets at the end of each one providing full cover for the enemy. It'd be a grueling battle if not for Reni on the other side, positioned to dispatch them all one by one. Reni is a strong attacker using a lance with a 3-tile range. His special move has a similar range, and though it only targets a single tile, it deals big damage to compensate. Destroy all the drones to face off against Big McLargehuge himself, who, aside from his 4 gold Wakiji backing him up, is a very standard boss fight. Butch Deadlift makes his retreat, and the day is saved. However, Iris suddenly becomes depressed and leaves on her own, much to Ogami's concern. Once the squads return to the theater, Sakura organizes a make-up welcoming party for Reni, since the actual party got so rudely interrupted. Iris passes around some French biscuits she received from her dad back in France, and talks about how much she loves her dear papa. It doesn't take long before Orihime snaps and lashes out at Iris, telling her that dads ain't shit and she'd be better off cutting ties with him. Iris, in turn, loses her cool, and with it loses control of her immense spirit power, making a total mess of the place. She runs off in a huff, and Ogami and Sakura split up to find her. After looking around the theater for a while, Ogami runs into Saki in the backstage area, who wastes 0 time attempting to get physical with him. Ogami attempts to leave when Saki takes a tumble, spraining her ankle in the process. Ogami eventually helps her up when... but of course. Sakura stomps out, and Saki follows close behind, leaving Ogami all alone. Or not.
海はいいなあ。かき割りだけど。Yo, Ogami.
This suited stranger is a man named Yuichi Kayama, a classmate of Ogami's from his time in the Naval Academy. Refusing to explain what he's doing here, Kayama reveals that Iris is in the attic, and vanishes just as quickly as he appeared. With this convenient intel, Ogami finds Iris, who apologizes for the mess she's caused. Before she agrees to go to bed though, she wants to write a letter to her parents, and suggests Ogami write them something too. He dictates and she translates it into French. Ogami praises Iris for how well she's handled being separated from her parents, but she then reveals that things aren't all sunshine and rainbows. Back when she still lived with her folks, she'd hole herself up in her room, afraid that her extraordinary powers would cause a nuisance to her parents. All she ever wanted was to live as normal a life as she could with them. Instead, she hid away, with only her stuffed animals to keep her company. Perhaps explaining why she's so attached to her bear, Jean-Paul. Long story short, she's just used to the crippling loneliness. Ogami succeeds in cheering her up, and Iris then asks if she can sleep in Ogami's room that night. Oh god, not this shit again. This is totally innocent, I swear! The next morning, Ogami and Iris head down for breakfast just as Yoneda's about to head out, dressed in full uniform and accompanied by Saki. They both have matters to attend to at the Ministry of the Army, but when Iris asks Yoneda if he can mail her letter, he gladly agrees. The alarm rings immediately thereafter, but nevertheless, Yoneda must go, leaving Ogami in charge. The enemy has been spotted in the Shibuya ward of Tokyo, transporting materials for some unknown purpose. Our options are to either attack at once, or to hang back and gather intel. Since we've opted to attack immediately, we have fewer enemies to contend with, but as a trade-off, we don't know which barrels are the ones containing the materials. We thus have no choice but to destroy every single barrel on the field, some of which are booby-trapped. Thankfully, the map is fairly small, and we're finally able to use team-up attacks again. Just like the first game, up until a certain point, you can only do team-up attacks with the main character of each chapter, which in this case is Iris. And like with pretty much everything else in this game, team-up attacks have gotten a huge upgrade too. The animations are far more intricate and detailed, while their firepower remains just as busted as ever, clearing out a huge chunk of this particular map in an instant. After we've broken all the barrels, Mokujiki returns, this time ready to fight us himself. He's different from other bosses in that he doesn't have a super attack per se, but rather he imbues these little mini-drones of his with full super meters, enhancing their damage output and pretty much forcing you to focus your attention on them. Thankfully, because this map is so compact, it shouldn't take long to take out Mokujiki, his mini-drones, and his reinforcements with a few AoE attacks. Mokujiki retreats, but the Flower Division don't have much time to celebrate before Sakura receives a distressing transmission from Saki. An attempt has been made on Yoneda's life. It's a legitimately shocking scene, too, contrasting against the usual fanciful anime fare with a fairly grounded depiction of realistic violence. It's a sharp divide from what you'd usually expect, and yet it doesn't feel out of place either. It's a reminder that, even with all the flashy cinematic super moves and giant robots, our heroes are still fragile and human. Chapter 3 opens with the team rushing to the military hospital where Yoneda is being kept. There they receive the news that Yoneda has fallen into a coma following the assassination attempt, and the odds of him waking up are practically zero. The bad news doesn't stop coming either, as Kasumi later tells Ogami that every single one of the review's financial backers have suddenly withdrawn their funding all at once. Ogami quickly realizes he has no choice but to rely on the profits from the Flower Division's upcoming stage play to make ends meet and keep the review afloat. He reasons that, if nothing else, it'd help everyone on the team take their minds off their sudden change in fortunes and keep them occupied. However, there's still a problem. The next play in the pipeline was set to be King Lear, but with Kana and Maria gone, they have nobody masculine enough to play the lead role. Well, for all of 5 seconds, that is, cause look who decided to show up.
なんだいなんだい。揃いも揃って景気の悪い顔しちゃってさ。
Yes, Kana's back, and after getting updated on the current situation, she's raring to go and bust the review out of their jam. Not long after they've started rehearsal, Kana and Sakura agree that the subject matter of King Lear is a bit too depressing given recent events, so they decide to give the show a happy ending, which just about breaks Orihime's brain. Penny seems cool with it at least. Things are starting to look up. Until later that night, when Ogami gets a call from Sumire. She acts rather strangely throughout, and eventually ends their conversation not with a talk to you later, but with a farewell. Alarming Ogami. Immediately thereafter, we finally get a glimpse into the Black Oni Council's inner workings. We have Onio as the leader, and his 5 generals, referred to collectively as the Gogyoshu, or the 5 elements. The 5 elements are made up of the previously established Kongo and Mokujiki, who represent metal and wood respectively, and we now get to meet 2 more. Tsuchigumo, a merciless, and not to mention seemingly shirtless, 4-armed huntress representing Earth,
狩りも楽しいってものさ
and Kasha, a sadistic arsonist with a superiority complex, who obviously represents fire.
すべてを燃やし尽くす私の炎とくとご覧あれ
There is one more missing general, Suiko, the representative of water, who is apparently out on some kind of secret mission. Now, remember what I said before about how they aren't just carbon copies of the Black Hive Council? Well, not only do the Black Oni make a much better rogues gallery than the Black Hive, the Black Oni are probably the best villain team in the whole series, period. Each member has a much stronger presence throughout the game, with all of them having much greater individual roles in the story, and all of them having far more charisma than any member of the Black Hive, or God forbid the Twilight Knights. During their meeting, Onio casually reveals that, in addition to Suiko, they have one more very powerful friend who has yet to reveal themselves, one whose influence was able to get all the review's financiers to withdraw their funding. Clearly, many secrets still remain. The following morning, Yuri interrupts the rehearsal with urgent news. Sumire is getting married, and the reinstatement of the review's financing is contingent upon her wedding. Remember how in the first game, Sumire had to come crawling back to her family to get financing for the review? Well, the other shoe has finally dropped. Everyone immediately agrees that this shit stinks to high heaven, and they decide to bust her out. Upon reaching the Kanzaki estate, they're turned away by the family's very obstinate butler. Kanna offers to smash the gates open and... well, yeah, fuck this guy. Tear that shit down. The gate gives way like paper mache under Kanna's might, and the butler sicks the mansion's guards on them. Kanna and Ogami go on ahead while the rest of the Flower Division hold them off. And after getting a bit lost in the sprawling manor, they finally make it to the room where Sumire is about to be wed off to this little twerp. In all fairness, though, it doesn't look like he's super excited about this either. They barge in, and Sumire's grandfather, the head of the Kanzaki Zaibatsu, and financier of the Imperial Combat Review, greets them more warmly than you might imagine he would. He proposes a deal to Ogami, that he'll resume funding the review if Ogami just walks away and leaves Sumire behind. Ogami tells him to stick it in his bushy mustache, cause Sumire's leaving with them. Ayame then shows up to voice her agreement and... wait, what?
あなたは
あやめさん
私は帝国歌劇団副司令藤枝楓
That's right, Ayame, the dearly departed vice commander, had a younger sister this whole time, Kaede Fujieda, who has taken up the mantle of vice commander. Yeah, you see, Ayame turned out to be a pretty popular character, so after writing her out of the story in the most conclusive way imaginable, the devs likely realized they might have made a mistake. Frankly, it's pretty transparent that Kaede is just a substitute Ayame. They have identical personalities and mannerisms and... oh wait, no, she likes Western fashions while Ayame preferred Japanese fashions. Never mind, totally different characters. Shortly after Grandpa Kanzaki is given his approval, an explosion goes off outside the mansion. The Black Oni have begun to make their move. Sumire's mom and dad give her their blessing and offer some encouragement before she runs off to battle. And it's nice to see not everyone in the family's a total piece of shit. For this combat mission, you're given the choice between prioritizing the elimination of the enemy forces or the evacuation of the Kanzaki Manor staff, and we'll be going with the latter option. The objective here is to protect the manor, not letting a single enemy unit reach it until everyone's been evacuated safely. By the way, remember how we let Kanna smash the gate? Well, that decision has an effect on the mission too, as enemy reinforcements steadily pour in from outside. This isn't too difficult, as you can take out a fair number of enemies with a team-up attack and mop up the rest afterward, and all the reinforcements have pitiful defense. It takes 4 turns to evacuate the mansion, after which you get to fight the boss, Tsuchigumo. This fight can be kinda scary thanks to her super attack's insane range and high damage, but so long as you can withstand it, you can retaliate in kind and end the fight relatively quickly. Tsuchigumo gets away, but the day is won. Back at the theater, just as Kaede formally introduces herself to the rest of the team, Kasumi and Yuri burst in with good news. Yoneda has miraculously regained consciousness. He'll have to stay at the hospital for a while longer before they'll discharge him, but the team are nevertheless relieved. What's more, the Flower Division's unique revision of King Lear turns out to be a huge hit, assuring the review's continued survival, for the time being. I actually really like this chapter. It helped me appreciate Sumire a lot more as a character, as it gives us a much greater insight into her personal life and provides more context for why she is the way she is. Plus, it's a great display of her and Kana's dynamic. It makes up for their rather lousy chapter together in the last game. About a month has passed by the time Chapter 4 comes around. Ogami and Sakura are on their way to visit Yoneda in the hospital when they come across a stray puppy. The little guy's initially wary of them and runs off across the street, and right in the way of an oncoming car. Ogami dives into traffic and rescues the puppy, upsetting the people in the car, who just so happen to be a group of self-important army men. Ogami identifies himself to them, and since the Imperial Combat Review is the least secret organization in the world, they recognize him, and start making fun of him for working with girls, proceeding to beat the cooties out of him. Ogami, not wanting to cause an incident between the army and the navy, doesn't fight back, and gets knocked into their car. One more person steps out of the car, a man of significant importance. Keigo Kyogoku, Minister of the Imperial Army.
あなたが大神一郎少尉ですか。いい目をしていますね。
Rather than apologize on behalf of his men, he recognizes Sakura and decides to talk mad shit about her dad before he takes his leave.
You're nothing but a punk, your daddy's a punk, and your mama's a bitch.
Once inside the hospital, Ogami overhears Yoneda talking to someone, who turns out to be none other than his old academy pal, Kayama. Kayama acts cagey and dodges Ogami's questions before he finally bolts. Whatever his deal is, it's clear he's hiding something. Ogami decides not to tell Yoneda about what happened with Kyogoku and his men, not wanting to worry him during his hospital stay, but Sakura can't hold it in and tells him anyway. Yoneda then tells the two everything he knows about Kyogoku, namely that he's a staunch advocate for a militaristic government. He's basically this game's representative of the real-world fascist elements that would eventually wind up taking over the Japanese government in the years leading up to World War II. But we can worry about all that stuff later, cause Koran's back! Her work at Hanayashiki's finally wrapped up, and she's here to stay. Koran and Sakura step outside the room while Yoneda asks Ogami to have a private chat. He entrusts Ogami with his sword from his days in the Anti-Demon Task Force, then sends him along his way. Outside, Ogami finds not only Koran and Sakura waiting for him, but the dog from earlier too. He's apparently waited outside for Ogami the whole time, so naturally, they decide to adopt the little guy. Once they get back to the theater, it's time to name the dog. Every member of the Flower Division has their own idea for a name, but Ogami has final say. It doesn't really matter what you pick, as picking a name doesn't affect your trust one way or the other with whoever thought of it. Just pick what you like. I still went with Koran's idea and named him Long, cause, well, I'm hopeless. Once that's done, Koran asks Ogami to swing by her room later. When he does, she reveals she's just finished a new invention, before she starts to reminisce about how she got her start with inventing. Remember how the first game didn't really have a dedicated Koran chapter? Well, they're finally making up for it, and it's a bit of a doozy. Koran reveals the first time she ever worked with machines was when she fixed her late father's pocket watch, which she keeps to this day as a memento of him. You see, Koran lost her family in China at a very young age. The Xinhai Revolution of 1911 broke out when Koran was just a little girl, and in the chaos, she lost her parents, her sisters, everything, save the clothes on her back and her father's watch. Thankfully, she was later found by Ayame and brought to Japan, and after she joined the review, it was Yoneda who encouraged her to follow her passion for machinery. As such, in addition to both her real father and her foster father in Japan, she thinks of Yoneda as a third father, and she feels an uncharacteristic rage towards whoever it may be that tried to assassinate him. She then calms down a bit and asks Ogami to test out her new invention. But this won't be the last time we see this side of her. Later that night, Ogami's about to set off on his night watch when he receives some upsetting news. Sakura and Koran have run off on their own to track down Kyogoku. Earlier in the day, Saki told them that she heard from the grapevine that Kyogoku is set to dine at a ryote in Fukugawa that evening. Ryote are high-end traditional Japanese restaurants with individual rooms per party, typically tended to by geisha. And so, Sakura and Koran have plotted to infiltrate the building disguised as geisha themselves. What they plan to do with Kyogoku isn't exactly clear, but either way, their plan goes belly up nearly immediately as they infiltrate the wrong room, and are forced to entertain a rather unsavory group of guests in order to maintain their cover. But that doesn't last terribly long either. Ogami arrives at the ryote not too long thereafter, alone, in order to avoid drawing too much attention. He doesn't make it far before he runs into a very friendly but very drunk man named Kazutoyo Yamaguchi, who all but forces Ogami to have a drink with him. Yamaguchi mentions he's heard nothing about Kyogoku visiting this establishment, and not long thereafter, multiple fires break out throughout the restaurant. And no, this isn't due to Koran's inventions. This is a deliberate arson attack. As Koran watches the flames, she begins to experience flashbacks of the revolution, and sets out to hunt the culprit on her own. Ogami finds Sakura as he and Yamaguchi attempt to evacuate, and he then goes after Koran on his own. When he catches up to her, she's in the midst of a traumatic breakdown, and has completely lost her composure, screaming at Ogami. The slap works, and Koran settles down, explaining herself to Ogami.
うちにとって花組は家族と同じ。そして帝劇はうちの家なんや。うちはそれをわけのわからん連中にぶちかわされとうないんや。
As they attempt to get to safety, the perpetrator reveals himself. And of course, it's Kasha of the Black Oni. He reveals that this was all a ploy to take out both the review and Yamaguchi in one fell swoop. Why Yamaguchi's been targeted has yet to be made clear, but when the rest of the Flower Division arrive on the scene, it's up to them to make sure Yamaguchi gets out alive. Our two options are to have Ogami act as a decoy while Yamaguchi escapes, or to escort Yamaguchi directly, and we'll be going with the decoy plan. The flames have spread to the rest of the town as the mission begins. Kaede's already gone and evacuated all the civilians, leaving only Yamaguchi. Although I don't condone drinking and driving, I'm gonna have to let it slide just this once, cause Yamaguchi's gotta get the fuck out of here while Ogami acts as a decoy. This mission's actually surprisingly painless. Switch to mountain mode, huddle up together outside of the range of the nearby cannons, and have every unit guard. This allows you to safely lure all the enemies to the same spot so that you can take them all out with a team-up attack the next turn. Though reinforcements will continuously spawn in, doing this will give you more than enough breathing room to keep them at bay for the 4 turns needed for Yamaguchi to escape. Once Yamaguchi's made it out, it's time to focus our attention on Kasha, who happens to have an ace up his sleeve. Kasha anticipated a civilian evacuation, and has already rigged the evacuation point to explode. He's about to push the button on his detonator when...
そこまでよ。
Maria saves the day, and with the crisis averted, the boss fight can begin in earnest. Everyone's placed real close to Kasha too, so it's a pretty straightforward boss fight at that. Just dump supers on him until he goes down. Easy peasy. Back at the theater, we discover the true identity of Kazutoyo Yamaguchi. He is none other than the Minister of the Navy, making our local naval ensign incredibly embarrassed that he didn't recognize him. As thanks for saving him from that jam, he promises to mobilize the Navy whenever the review might need them, and vows to do whatever he can to reinstate the review's financial backing. With the Flower Division finally reunited, and with the theater's fortunes on the mend, what better time than now to go on a hard-earned vacation? Chapter 5 begins with Tsubaki informing Ogami that she's leaving the theater for a while on a secret mission. So secret that not even Kasumi or Yuri know. Their discussion is interrupted by the surprise return of Yoneda, who just got discharged from the hospital. Later that night, Yoneda announces that the Flower Division's going on vacation, and that reservations have already been made at a resort in Atami, a small town in Japan famous in real life for its hot springs. However, Yoneda and Kaede will be staying behind to watch the fort, so Ogami's bringing along the Kinematron to keep in touch in case anything happens. Ogami has some time to kill before they set out, and it's here that we get a very interesting piece of lore that's surprisingly totally optional, regarding the origins of Silsa Steel, the metal that spherical armors are made of. It all started in the US during the Civil War. In the Sakura Wars timeline, the Confederacy utilized black magic to fight against the Union, who were rendered completely powerless before it. However, in the aftermath of one such battle, a lone survivor was discovered, a baby in a steam-powered tractor. The tractor, as it turns out, was made out of an inexpensive composite metal, which turned out to be Silsa Steel, a metal capable of defending against demonic power. This might sound like a weird tangent for me to go on, but keep all this in the back of your mind for a while. It'll come up again eventually. At last, it's finally time to leave on their vacation, but Ogami can't help but be worried about leaving Yoneda and the others alone, which is when Yoneda reveals he's hired some extra help. We have to talk about the Rose Division. The Rose Division is a support group within the review made up of elite army soldiers, tasked with guarding the theater while the Flower Division go on their well-earned vacation. There's Kotone Seiryuin, the captain, who's your standard anime pretty boy archetype. Long flowing hair, talks about how much he loves beauty, you know the drill.
さすがは海軍少尉殿。その洗練された物押しと優しさ。男でも惚れるわ。
Then there's Kikunojo Oka, who's very soft-spoken, wears a skirt, and has a not-so-secret crush on Ogami.
やだ琴音さん。そんな素敵です。
Finally, there's Yokihiko Ota, who's basically a walking checklist of gay stereotypes. He has a deep voice, but speaks with an exaggerated effeminate dialect, wears heavy makeup, and constantly makes advances at Ogami. Now, to be clear, you can make queer or queer-coded characters with flamboyant or campy personalities without making them reductive or offensive. That's not the issue here. No, the real problem with the Rose Division is twofold. One is the fact that Yokihiko in particular frequently makes unwanted advances at Ogami, despite Ogami's repeated refusals of consent. Second is how the game itself treats the Rose Division. Despite their roles in the story becoming more important as the game progresses, the way they're written basically boils down to, haha, they're gay, isn't that weird? Yoneda, Kaede, and Saki are cool with them, and even Orihime mentions that she knows a lot of people like them, but the rest of the Flower Division treat them with incredulity at best, and Ogami in particular is always visibly uncomfortable around them, if not outright terrified, as though he's afraid their gayness will rub off on him or something. Then again, I don't completely blame him considering how predatory they can be written at times. I've seen it theorized online that these characters are the reason why the older Sakura Wars games have yet to be ported to modern platforms, because of quote-unquote political correctness or whatever, but considering these characters still to this day show up in gacha game crossovers, I'm not sure if that's really why. Their depiction is a product of its time, I guess, but even that excuse only goes so far, and it's a black mark on a game I otherwise love to pieces. Anyway, Ogami and the others get on a bus to Atami, and during the ride, Iris invites Ogami to play a game of cards. Oh yeah, minigames are back, and just like nearly everything else in the game, they're improved over the last one. Nothing that set the world on fire, but nevertheless pretty good. The card game of choice this time around is President, a game where players race to get rid of all their cards, and whoever wins one round gets to steal the 2 best cards from the last place player in the next round. It's a very fun game, and it helps that the AI is much easier than the Koi Koi AI in the first game. Though maybe it's a little too easy.
Compre 4, compre 4, 1, compre 4.
Anyway, regardless of whether you ultimately win or lose, once you're done, the bus has just about reached the resort. The resort in question is a ryokan, a traditional Japanese-style inn with tatami floors and paper doors. After they've dropped off their bags, the gang takes a walk on the beach, where Ogami discovers Kayama has also come lurking about, acting as fishy as ever. After a traditional Japanese meal,
the fucking bus is fucking raw!
A rowdy pillow fight, and a good night's sleep, the Flower Division split off into 3 groups. Kana, Koran, and Orihime are going hiking, Sumire, Iris, and Reni are heading to the beach, and Sakura, Maria, and Saki are hitting up the hot springs. The latter 2 are bound to result in some wacky, sexy hijinks, which is why we're going hiking. Nothing truly important happens during the hike, but it's just a really nice, fun moment. I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record at this point, but seriously, I think that this kind of thing right here is the biggest strength of Sakura Wars 2. We get so many opportunities to see these characters live their lives, interact with each other, and have fun. Sure, you had moments like that in the first game, but not at this volume. Hell, that's pretty much what this whole chapter is. It never drags the pace down either. I'm never asking the game to hurry up and get to the next battle or action set piece. I just love hanging out with these characters, regardless of whether or not there's a fight coming up. After everyone gets back, they all decide to end the day by lighting up some fireworks, all while teaching Orihime about Japanese firework traditions. Later that night, however, Ogami gets the hankering for a late-night dip in the hot springs. He spots Reni there ahead of him, and figures this would be a great opportunity for some manly bonding, just guys being dudes. Or not, as Ogami makes a startling discovery. Reni's not a he, but a she. Yeah, it turns out nobody else knew either, and Orihime just kinda didn't tell anybody. In fact, you actually have multiple opportunities earlier in the game to discover this, and the scene at the hot springs only occurs if you haven't already found out by then. This kind of twist tends to be pretty iffy in most media, but I think this game handles it better than most. Reni wasn't trying to pass as a boy on purpose, and she wasn't outed or anything just now. She just never bothered to correct anyone when they misgendered her. She didn't really care. Anyway, today's itinerary is a big group outing to the beach, but Maria pulls Ogami aside and suggests he call the theater with a status report. However, the Kinematron is nowhere to be found. The 2 of them comb the premises for it, while taking care not to alarm the others and ruin their beach trip. Eventually, Maria talks to the owners of the establishment and discovers that their kids found a strange shard on the beach, one with the review's insignia on it. Ogami and Maria head to the beach, where their worst fears are confirmed. The Kinematron was smuggled out of the resort and smashed to pieces. The 2 of them investigate the nearby cave in search of clues to the culprit's identity, and find a radio transceiver stashed away inside. The transceiver rings, and it's none other than Kongo on the other end, who casually confirms that all this was none other than Suiko's doing. Thankfully, Kongo's not the brightest crayon in the box, so Maria fools him into thinking that she's Suiko, and Ogami gets to decide where old Dirk Hardpeck will send his reinforcements. Once Slab Bulkhead hangs up on Maria, Ogami calls the theater to get the Kobu sent over. But just as soon as he and Maria are about to leave, they discover the tide has risen, and the only way out has been filled with water. This isn't a problem for the Navy ensign, but Maria doesn't know how to swim. She offers to stay behind, but Ogami refuses to leave her and helps her swim out. She nearly drowns in the process, but she pulls through in the end, waking up just in time for the flying whale to show up and for the battle to begin. We finally get a glimpse of Suiko, and is it just me or does she seem kind of familiar? Anyway, she's ready to attack the Flower Division while they're totally defenseless, and even though her plans get spoiled immediately,
are you sure about that?
She remains undeterred. Because we told Kongo to show up via sea, our objective now is to make sure he never actually gets here, which we'll do by taking down all the lampposts signaling our location. Take out all the enemies on the north side of the map with a team-up attack. Yo, their trick looks kinda different from what I remember. And have everyone else focus primarily on the lampposts, as there's a hard turn limit before Punch Side Iron is set to arrive. You can clean up the rest of the enemies once you're done with all that. Once every target on the field's been eliminated, it's time to fight Suiko herself. But before long, Slab Squat Thrust finds his way to us regardless, outraged that we tricked him. Since Bold Big Flank over here is easily the hardest hitter of the two, focus on him first. If you have everyone dump their supers on him, he should go down within a single turn. And even if you don't have supers to spare for Suiko, she's fairly manageable without them. Upon her defeat, she tells Ogami that the power of friendship is for chumps, and that she'll shatter his faith in it in due time. Well, whatever, we won, even if our vacation turned out to be a total wash. Swap to Disc 2 and it's time for Chapter 6. Attacks from the Black Oni have become more frequent in the months since the Flower Division's vacation, and Kaede can't help but notice that Reni's been getting kinda sloppy. Later that day, during a rehearsal for the review's fall production of The Bluebird, Reni keeps losing her focus whenever Maria's character asks her what it is she's fighting for, and she eventually runs off to her room. The others are worried about her, and Ogami takes it upon himself to find out what's wrong. Along the way, he runs into Tsubaki's temporary replacement, a young girl named Tsubomi no Nomura.
憧れの帝劇の売店で働くことができるなんて、まるで夢みたい。
Tsubomi is a student at the Maidens Academy, a school established by Yoneda to foster young girls so that they may one day join the review. Basically the Sakura Wars equivalent of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Anyhow, after helping the others prep for an imminent typhoon, Ogami eventually finds Reni in her room and tries to cheer her up. Reni then asks Ogami what his reason for fighting is, but no matter what he answers, she isn't satisfied and tells him to leave. Ogami is left in a funk, wondering what he should do, when Kayama drops by, quite literally, to give him some more sage advice.
個人曰く、苔の一年、岩をも通す。言葉で語るな、理屈で考えるな、そんなものは答えではない。
Kayama leaves the way he came, and Iris comes in soon thereafter to show something to Ogami, a flower crown she made to help cheer Reni up. They decide to give it to her, and it seems to work, even managing to make her smile. However, just as they leave, Saki shows up to... Wait, are you serious? Nope, stop, hold up. The fuck is she still doing here? I mean, everyone got a good look at Suiko at the resort, right? Like, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. It's so fucking obvious they're the same person. And you mean to tell me nobody here put two and two together? Not even you, Koran? You're supposed to be the smart one! Well, anyway, Suiko barges into Reni's room and hypnotizes her, telling her that friendship is for stupid babies. The typhoon hits not long after, and Kaede receives intel that the person who shot Yoneda was none other than Saki, and that she's also been feeding info to the Black Oni this whole time. Ogami finds Iris outside of Reni's room, and the two decide to check in on her, only to find the room empty and Iris's flower crown on the floor. Koran barges in soon thereafter, telling them that Reni's run off in her Eisenkleid. The Flower Division convenes in the command center, where Kaede tells everyone the truth about Reni. During World War I, a group of German scientists began a secret project named Wachstum to create perfect soldiers with the capability to wield spirit power. The sole survivor of this project was Reni. She was raised to think only of battle, purposely deprived of human contact. By the time the war ended and she was rescued, the damage had long been done. Reni was practically an emotionless husk. With the explanation concluded, the team splits into groups of 2 to search for Reni, and Iris joins up with Ogami. Using Iris's telepathy, they find her ahead of the others, but she is fully under Suiko's control. Suiko gloats that Reni will be offered as a gift to that man, and orders Reni to kill them. Ogami is given the choice to either hold Reni off on his own until Iris can get help, or to have Iris stick around and help Reni regain her senses by themselves. For this playthrough, we're having Iris get help from the others while Ogami stays behind. The goal is simple: climb the hill to reach Reni and talk to her. But there's a ton of enemies in your way. Thankfully, Iris comes back with help after a few turns, and the mission becomes much more doable. Once Ogami reaches Reni, it takes several turns before Ogami talks her out of her trance, taking multiple hits from her in the process. Eventually, he makes a breakthrough, and with a little help from Iris, he drives it home and brings Reni back to normal.
Reni!
Thanks to the support of Ogami and the rest of the Flower Division, Reni finally has an answer to her question, and a reason to fight. It's now time to pay Suiko back for all the hell she's put us through. She's not gonna make it easy though, as her fight employs a rather unique mechanic. Suiko summons a bunch of shadow clones on the field, and it's up to you to figure out which one is the real one, as it's randomized every playthrough. What's more, Suiko's super attack isn't particularly strong, but every shadow clone has its own super meter, so the damage can pile up quickly if you're not careful. Also, the game doesn't let you skip super attack animations, so have fun with that. After Ogami takes his turn, Reni will tell him the general area the real Suiko is in, but there's actually an even easier, more precise method. If you enter the transmission menu, you'll get an overview of the map and your mission objective, and you'll also see the health bar of the boss as well as their turn order. I don't know if this is intentional or a programming oversight or what, but this menu shows the turn order for the real Suiko, so you can just find the Suiko on the map with that number and focus on her. Upon her defeat, she warns the Flower Division of the difficulties that await them before her spherical armor explodes, killing her in the process. The others are kinda sad it had to come to this, that she couldn't go back to being the Saki they knew. But the bad vibes immediately get pushed aside as Reni reaffirms her intention to stay and fight for her newfound ideals. What I appreciate about Reni is that, even after all this, she doesn't miraculously change her entire personality on a dime. She's more open and personable than before, certainly, but she's not all the way there yet. It's not as comparatively easy as Maria learning to loosen up and trust others back in the first game. Reni's scars run extremely deep, and they'll need time to heal. It's a process, and one that continues over the next several games. It makes her tragedy feel more genuine, and it makes her gradual self-betterment feel earned and much more satisfying as a result. Chapter 7 opens with the Flower Division visiting a local festival. After partaking in some of the activities on offer, Ogami and Orihime decide to wander about together to pass the time. They come upon a caricaturist's booth when Orihime is suddenly taken aback. The caricaturist recognizes her and calls her by name, at which point Orihime flips out and stomps off. Later that day, Tsubomi finds Ogami and tells him there's a strange man hanging about outside, and as it turns out, it's the caricaturist from the festival, who simply refers to himself as Ogata.
私は尾形と言います。しがない放浪の絵描きです。
After some light questioning, Ogata feels comfortable enough to tell Ogami the truth. He is Orihime's estranged father. In his youth, Ogata traveled to Italy to become a painter, wandering from town to town. It wasn't long before he met Orihime's mother, Karino Soletta, and the two fell in love, eventually giving birth to Orihime out of wedlock. Ogata went to meet Karino's parents to ask for her hand in marriage, but with them being aristocrats and him being a lonely painter, they staunchly refused, separating the two and forbidding Ogata from ever seeing his daughter again. With his love taken from him and his dreams as a painter dashed, he had no choice but to return to Japan. He then divulges that while he was aware that Orihime was in Japan, having seen her name on an Imperial Review flyer, he could never work up the nerve to see her again after so long. Nevertheless, he always prayed for Orihime's happiness, a claim which upsets Orihime, who was listening in secret the whole time.
私が知らないとでも思っているのですか？あなたはママと私を捨てた最低の男です。消えなさい。私の前から消えなさい。そして二度と現れないで。
Ogata complies and goes in peace, knowing he can't expect her to forgive him. Meanwhile, we get a glimpse of some vaguely familiar shadowy figures as they plot to overthrow the government. On November 9th, they plan to seize the theater and capture Sakura Shinguji for reasons yet unknown. Never mind that shit though, we haven't seen our boy Kayama in a while. He swoops in through Ogami's window once again to offer him some helpful advice regarding Orihime's situation with her father. When trying to talk to Orihime fails once more, Ogami makes the decision to force a meeting between the two so that they can talk it out. Wait, did he literally drag her the whole way there from the theater or something? Anyway, Ogami leaves the two of them alone to sort their feelings out. But just as the discussion begins to break down, there's a loud bang. The festival is under attack. Kasha takes Orihime and Ogata captive, but not before the two finally reconcile, albeit under pretty unfavorable circumstances. Orihime tells Ogami to get the others and that she'll stay behind to look after her father. As such, the combat mission begins with only one possible objective: rescue Orihime and her father. Kasha has locked the two of them away inside of a small shack that's rigged to explode. Each red Wakiji on the field acts as a detonation device, and with each one that reaches the shack, the closer the bomb gets to exploding. Kasha, being kind of a sadist, wants us to guess how many Wakiji it'll take for the bomb to go off, but we're not about to find out. Although the battlefield is pretty big and littered with all sorts of enemies and traps, there's actually a pretty quick way to beat this mission. It's hard to notice, and indeed, I totally missed it on my first playthrough, but near the bottom of the map, there's a little raft on the river. Once at least a single unit gets on it, be they enemy or friendly, it'll move to the other dock downstream, which just so happens to be right in front of the rigged shack.
My, how convenient!
Shift into wind mode and get Ogami over to the raft ASAP, and after 2 turns he'll be in position, ready to disarm the bomb. Disarming the bomb takes multiple turns with multiple lips prompts, and though the Wakiji can't activate the bombs when Ogami's nearby, they can still hurt him, so you'll want to choose wisely and wrap this up quick. During all this, Orihime reveals to her father that she's a member of the Imperial Combat Review, but she has her doubts that the others will come to save her, not because she mistrusts them, but because she realizes just how nasty she's been to them this whole time. Before she can wallow in self-pity too long, Ogami breaks through and rescues her, and together, they're ready to take down Kasha once and for all. The fight against Kasha is fairly straightforward, save for one tiny wrinkle. Once Kasha gets his turn, he'll spit out a couple of remote bombs that not only have a huge range, but they do a bunch of damage too, particularly if you're in fire or wind mode, and he still has a super attack on top of that. If you can weather that storm though, do your usual super and team-up attack dump on him and he'll go down. Alas, Kasha still has one last trick up his sleeve. One final Wakiji ready to detonate the bomb Ogami had previously disarmed. However, with a little intervention from Orihime, it winds up lighting Kasha up instead. Having finally gotten a taste of his own medicine, Kasha dies in the ensuing explosion. Orihime takes the time to apologize to everyone about the way she'd been acting up till now, And the chapter ends with Orihime and Ogami visiting a recovering Ogata in the hospital, who wastes no time giving Ogami some relationship advice.
やだ、もうパパったら結婚だなんて。
We don't get much time to savor our victory before we are thrust into Chapter 8, where, frankly speaking, shit gets incredibly real, incredibly fast. On the morning of November 9th, a rogue faction of the Imperial Army instigates a coup d'etat. This is a direct historical parallel with not one, but several coup d'etat attempts made in the early 1930s. These coups were instigated by rogue factions of the Imperial Army, made with the end goal of supplanting the Taisho-era democracy with a militarist fascist state. The coup depicted here most closely resembles the February 26th incident of 1936, where the coup d'etat forces attempted to assassinate major political figures and seize important government buildings in one fell swoop. The coup attempt ended in failure, and the instigators were arrested and executed. Though the revolutionary movement died with them, their ideologies persisted within the army, as totalitarianism slowly established itself in the following years. And so, like in the actual February incident, the rogue faction attacks multiple sites throughout the city at once, including the Grand Imperial Theater, and Ogami is quickly awoken by the commotion. He finds Sakura and, much to their surprise, the soldiers spot them and declare their intent to shoot Sakura specifically on sight. Ogami and Sakura get away, eventually running into Yoneda. He tells them the reason the coup d'etat forces are likely targeting Sakura is because of her bloodline power of purifying evil, the power of Haja. Yoneda then gives Ogami an order of the utmost importance. Take the Majinki and Sakura and head to Hanayashiki, post-haste, to rendezvous with the person waiting there for them, while everyone else stays behind to protect the theater. You may be wondering how the review managed to get the Majinki back, but that story will have to wait for another time. Ogami heads underground with Sakura and runs into the Rose Division, where Captain Sadirian reveals the true purpose of the Rose Division was to guard the Majinki. He tosses one of the Majinki, the Orb, to Ogami, explaining that the Majinki are useless if they aren't fully assembled, and Ogami and Sakura proceed to make their escape aboard the Review's transport train, the Goraigo. Once they reach Hanayashiki, they discover the person waiting for them is none other than Tsubaki, who reveals her secret assignment was to procure new spherical armors from the Review's Hokkaido branch. The successor to the Kobu and the Jinbu, these new armors are called Tenbu, and are just what Ogami and Sakura need to turn the tides and reclaim the theater. Before they set out, though, the revelations continue, as Kayama contacts Hanayashiki via Kinematron and reveals to Ogami that he is, in fact, the captain of the Moon Division, the reconnaissance and intel arm of the Imperial Combat Review. He explains that the coup d'etat forces have erected the theater's guard wall, as seen in Chapter 1, and reinforced the perimeter with turrets. Kayama only has the means to disable one of these defenses, and leaves the choice to Ogami. We'll be disabling the turrets this time around, robbing the opposition of their firepower as we enter this chapter's first of many combat missions. In an unusual turn, this mission begins with the boss already on the map, and it turns out to be none other than our old pal, Mokujiki. However, thanks to the power of the Tenbu, this shouldn't cause too much of a problem. If you remember what the Jinbu upgrade was like in the last game, it's much the same story here. New design, new supers, buffed stats, the works. It'll take a few turns for Kayama to destroy the turrets, but once he does, you can approach the wall safely. Since the AI prioritizes targeting Ogami above all else, use Ogami to lure Mokujiki's drones to one end of the map while Sakura busts open the door on the other. This will give her ample time to begin the offensive against Mokujiki, and Ogami time to rush back to her side before the drones swarm her. 2 supers and a few extra smacks on the tush later, Mokujiki's down for good, as his mech explodes and takes him with it. The battle is won, but the day isn't saved just yet. Ogami and Sakura infiltrate the theater, only to find it completely devoid of enemy soldiers. They find the rest of the Flower Division safely holed up in the command center, but as soon as they're reunited, the party gets crashed by none other than Army Minister Kyogoku, who's basically just come here to gloat at them, revealing that he was the mastermind behind the coup. He starts talking mess about Sakura's dad yet again, and Sakura, being absolutely fed up with his bullshit, attacks him with her sword. The attack is blocked by Onio, who confirms that Kyogoku is, indeed, the true brains behind the Black Oni Council. Kyogoku and Onio make their escape, and the Flower Division convene to discuss their next steps. Good news is, the coup d'etat forces have been pushed back by the Navy, under the command of none other than our pal Yamaguchi. The bad news is, during the chaos, the coup forces seized the other two Majinki, and so the Flower Division must set out to recover them. Meanwhile, back at the Black Oni's secret hideout, Kyogoku reacts to the news of the coup d'etat's imminent failure with surprising ambivalence. He couldn't care less about what happens to the revolutionary soldiers, as they were merely a means to an end. We're not quite sure what exactly that end is yet, just that, quote, the true Tokyo will awaken. Energy readings from the Majinki have been found in a rail yard in the Shinjuku ward of Tokyo, so the team heads over there to retrieve them. Everyone's been outfitted with a Tembu now, and even Orihime and Reni have switched over from their Eisenkleits. Despite the peculiar zigzagging map and the sheer number of turrets on the field here, this is a surprisingly straightforward battle, and is basically just an excuse to run wild with your new toys. The Wakiji here can barely put a scratch on the Tembu, even when you're in fire or wind mode, and the battle ends automatically once you've defeated them all. You don't even need to make it to the other end where Onio is waiting. And even if you did, there's not a boss fight against him. Instead, Onio unleashes his power DBZ style, threatening to blow everyone away, until Sakura powers through to put a stop to him. The two cross swords, and though Sakura's Tembu gets damaged in the process, she makes Onio drop the other two Majinki. He doesn't seem to care too much though, saying that if Sakura dies, he won't even need the Majinki for his plan. Onio tells the Flower Division to come to the Black Oni's base in the Akasaka ward if they wish to settle things once and for all, before he retreats through this Organization 13 looking portal. The Majinki have finally been recovered, but Sakura is not particularly excited about it and asks to be alone. Ogami catches up with her a short while later, and she tells him she fears she'll have to follow in her father's footsteps, using the Majinki to amplify her power of Haja in order to save Tokyo, sacrificing herself in the process.
私まだ死ねない。死にたくない。普通の女の子みたいに好きな人と一緒にいたい。みんなと一緒にいたい。大神さん、私わがままですか？
Ogami decides he's finally had enough of the Majinki being the cause of so much bloodshed and suffering, and smashes them all against the ground, shattering them to pieces. Sakura is moved by this, but she can't help but feel that Ogami just made a huge mistake, and that she herself is to blame. That's when the rest of the team comes in to cheer her up, reassuring her that they don't need the Majinki, and that they'll always have her back. They all board the flying whale to Akasaka, where, according to Kayama's intel, Ogami has two options for attacking the Black Oni's subterranean lair: a frontal assault, or infiltrating from the rear. We're going for the infiltration route, as it is the safest of the two options, and the chapter's final mission is gonna be a doozy either way. The infiltration route is a gauntlet of 4 consecutive battles with no breaks to save in between. The first 2 battles are relatively painless, just have everyone move to the designated spot on the map. The enemies are still fairly weak, but the turrets and traps can cause significant damage. Plus your health carries over from the first battle to the second, so don't think you can just tank the damage and blitz through. The third battle, meanwhile, is a rematch against Tsuchigumo. And even with our new Tembu, her super attack does significant damage, and her backup Wakiji certainly don't help. If you switch into fire mode and dump all your supers on her, you should be able to take her out without too much trouble. Before the Flower Division can land the finishing blow, Tsuchigumo jumps off a nearby ledge, presumably to her death. At last, we've reached the inner sanctum and are ready to take out the head honcho himself, Onio. I'm not gonna lie, this map is scary as shit. There's a whole lineup of turrets near the bottom that provide coverage to almost the entire map, and these red statues have a nasty habit of turning into Wakiji when you get close to them. As such, the safest option is to stay in our little hidey hole and have Onio bring the fight to us. Have all but Ogami and a shielded unit huddle in the corner, baiting Onio's super attack and rendering it useless with the shield command. After that, you know the drill. Dump all your supers on him before he has a chance to attack again. And so long as you're in fire mode, you should just barely knock him out before his next turn comes around. Onyo is defeated, the coup d'etat has been suppressed, and the Black Oni are in total shambles. Onyo tries to drag everyone to hell with him, but our heroes make it out to greet the dawn. What's more, we soon learn that not only have all the instigators of the coup been arrested, but Kyogoku has been discovered dead in his home, having committed suicide. The threat looming over Tokyo has passed, and in due time, peace returns to the city. This chapter is a lot, to say the least. It's yet another example of this otherwise lighthearted game tackling surprisingly dark themes, this time with very real historical parallels. It's kinda weird to have slice-of-life hijinks and magic anime robot fights broken up by this level of real shit, and yet, somehow, it works. The stakes get raised in a meaningful way, but the game knows well enough to not overdo it, never going too dark or pulling this kind of stunt too often. The same goes for this chapter's sheer volume of combat missions too. If every chapter were like this, it'd be way too much, but having to tackle such a gauntlet of missions gives the chapter a much greater sense of gravity, in a way that the similar chapter in the first game didn't quite manage. Also, brief tangent incoming, but now that Kayama's true identity has been revealed, indulge me while I ramble about him. Holy shit, I fucking love this dude, this exemplar of men. He's a total goof, charming as all hell, and every moment with him on screen is a joy. The first time I played this game, I was actually afraid they'd make him another double agent like Saki or something. After all, his penchant for always showing up in the right place at the right time is kinda fishy, and his tendency to dodge questions only made him more suspicious. However, he's always been there to provide Ogami with helpful advice, and he totally came through during the coup d'etat attempt, firmly establishing him as the biggest bro in the world. He never overstays his welcome either, so his shtick never wears too thin or gets grating. It also helps that he's not a smug, wisecracking jackass, and that under his goofy exterior he's actually hyper-competent. Anybody writing comic relief support characters for other games could stand to take a few notes from Kayama's example. Chapter 9 is a welcome reprieve from the intensity of Chapter 8. It's peaceful and chill, and not just because it's winter, but because there's no combat mission at the end. The chapter begins with the members of the Flower Division telling Ogami about their plans for a special one-night-only performance of a Christmas play, titled The Miracle Bells. However, they start acting cagey around him when he asks too many questions. The reason why is eventually made clear when he meets with Kaede in private. She reveals to him that he's been given the task of deciding who the star of the play will be. It's a big ask, but before he can dwell on it too long, Ogami remembers that, earlier in the chapter, Kasumi, Yuri, and Tsubaki all asked him to help assist them with different errands, and he can only pick one to help. In our case, Ogami helps Kasumi with filing receipts, and she can't help but notice something's bugging him. She invites him to grab a bite to eat at Rengate, a famous real-life restaurant established in Ginza during the Meiji era that's still around to this day. Ogami tells Kasumi about his troubles with deciding who to pick, and she suggests picking whoever he likes the most. Indeed, as you may have guessed, this decision is what locks in your choice of love interest for the rest of the game. Because what better way to say I love you than with nepotism? Your choices for the starring role are limited to the top 4 characters with the highest romance level. You get these nice scenes with each of them where Ogami helps them calm their nerves ahead of the big announcement. But we can only pick one of them, and... come on, need I say more? The following morning, Ogami finally announces his decision, having picked Koran. Everyone is really nice and supportive about it too, with only some mild teasing from Sumire and Orihime. Having handpicked the star, Ogami winds up taking directing duties for the whole play as well, and the player can make multiple decisions about how the play should go.
Chinese checkers, mashed potatoes, and a Tyrannosaurus Rex!
After weeks of setup and rehearsal, it's Christmas Eve, and finally time for the big play. Even with the unconventional choice for the starring role, the show proves to be a huge hit. Following the end of the performance, the Flower Division winds down with a combination wrap party, Christmas party, and birthday party, as December 24th is also Reni's birthday. After some time, Ogami steps out to get some air, and Koran follows him out. Yoneda spots the two of them and gives them special permission to stay out till midnight. The two then enjoy a quiet, snowy night together, and while visiting an empty chapel, Koran ends the aforementioned quiet in typical Koran fashion. Thus, the chapter ends with no conflict, just good feelings all around. I love this chapter so much, I don't even know where to begin. It's just so pleasant, so cozy, so nice. It's the perfect chaser to the madness of the preceding chapter. There's no battle scene to disrupt the good mood, not a single one of the lips choices presented can make you lose trust with anyone, and the most interpersonal drama you get is Ogami not wanting to hurt the feelings of whoever he didn't pick. And even then, everyone's understanding and supportive about who he did pick. As much as the word is overused these days, this chapter is genuinely wholesome. The good times don't stop there either, as we roll into Chapter 10. It's New Year's Day, and every member of the review has their own plans for the holiday. This chapter features what are probably the biggest character-specific events in the game, as your choice of love interest drastically changes what you do throughout the chapter. In our case, Koran's going to the city of Kobe to visit her foster father, and she wants Ogami to tag along. Along the way, she explains that her foster father is the one who formally taught her how to work with machinery and fostered her love for inventions. When they finally get to his home, they decide to ring the doorbell and... Oh, so that's where she gets it from. Meet Percy Howard, an eccentric British inventor. He speaks with both a very thick foreign accent and a very thick Kansai dialect at the same time. And even though he doesn't sound particularly British, it's truly something to behold. I absolutely love the voice acting coming out of this guy.
He's funny man, isn't he? Ogamiはなかなかおもろい人ですね。
He shows Ogami a collection of old inventions Koran made during her youth, from before her time with the review. Most of them were abject failures, but Koran looks back on them with pride. Mr. Howard then brings Koran her father's pocket watch, which, as we learn, saved her life during the revolution by blocking an oncoming bullet. This scene at Koran's house is yet another pleasant and heartfelt sequence, but alas, the good times must come to an end eventually. I mean, we're still on disc 2 of 3. You didn't think this was actually over, did you? Indeed, it turns out that Kongo, Tsuchigumo, Onyo, and Kyogoku are all still alive, and nearing the fruition of their true plan. To help them with this plan, they have engineered an unusual new breed of foot soldiers. During the Demon War 8 years prior, the army secretly collected demon corpses in the aftermath, enhancing them with steam technology to create a battalion of undead demon cyborgs, known as demon weapons.
Make me feel alive again.
When do they plan to start their attack? How about right now? As Koran shows off the Kinematron to Mr. Howard, it suddenly starts ringing, with Kaede on the other end. Enemies have been sighted in the Oji district of Tokyo's Kita Ward, so the family get-together, unfortunately, has to end, just as it was getting started. The Flying Whale comes to pick up the two and rendezvous with the rest of the team, as we begin our first combat mission in quite some time. Ogami and Koran arrive on the scene, but the others are nowhere to be found. They're then confronted by the still-living Onyo, Blast Hard Cheese, and Tsuchigumo, who reveal they've captured the rest of the Flower Division and imprisoned them all in these whack-ass crystal prisons. Onyo says something about releasing the seal on this torii gate that pops out from the abyss, then sicks the demon weapons on our heroes. Though they're not too scary, the demon weapons do still deal significantly more damage and have higher defense than the Wakiji we were mopping the floor with 2 chapters ago. Still, the Tembu's defenses are strong enough that you can safely shift into wind mode in order to speed across the map and bust out the rest of your squad mates. Also, now that our love interest is locked in, you can perform a team-up attack with her at any point from now on, provided you both have full super meters. Even if you don't rescue everybody, the battle ends once you've defeated all the demon weapons, and everyone else gets rescued during the scene transition. By the time the Flower Division are ready to take on Onyo, he reveals they're too late. That's when Kyogoku shows up to reveal his plan to our heroes.
Surprise, bitch.
Now, stop me if you've heard this one before. By unsealing 8 gates throughout Tokyo, and invoking a magic sigil known as the Hachikimon Fumajin, or the Seal of 8 Demonic Gates, Kyogoku aims to awaken what he calls Musashi. In medieval Japan, Musashi was the name of the province that comprised what is now modern Tokyo, Saitama, and Kanagawa prefectures. This game's version of Musashi is composed of all the vengeful souls of the damned in Tokyo, given physical form. And with this power, he aims to cleanse Tokyo and restore it to what he calls its true form. It's not exactly the same as Satan and Tenkai's plans, but why do I get the feeling Kyogoku copied their homework? Kyogoku claims the review are too late to stop him, to which Sakura's like, yeah, wanna bet? Before she can get near him though, Onio gets in her way once again, which is when she makes a shocking realization. Onio is none other than Kazuma Shinguji, Sakura's late father, brought back from the dead. With Onio having successfully bought enough time for him, Kyogoku finally summons Musashi, which isn't a sunken landmass like Yamato was, but rather is this floating thing with a creepy goddamn face on it.
Hello!
With Musashi at his command, Kyogoku begins his assault on the city in order to bring about his one true Tokyo, as we finally progress to Disc 3. As Chapter 11 begins, the team takes a minute to process all the information they just learned about Kyogoku's faked death, the survival of the Black Oni Council, and the truth of Onio's identity. Yoneda also confirms the presence of Torii gates at the site of nearly every major battle against the Black Oni, and Kyogoku's lineage as the descendant of an extremely powerful spirit medium, explaining how he was able to accomplish his plan. The odds seem insurmountable, until Yoneda reveals an ace up his sleeve. Remember the Mikasa? Well, guess what? We made another one! Salvaging parts from the wreckage of the first Mikasa while leaving the rest to be used as Mikasa Memorial Park, they've pieced together a new and improved Mikasa, and it's only a matter of minutes before it's ready for launch. As they wait for takeoff, Sakura asks to talk to Ogami outside, in private. She's emotionally conflicted about her dad, and is at a total loss for what to do about him. Ogami suggests they can bring him back to the light, and she agrees, vowing to fight him herself, hoping she can get through to him that way. The chat gets cut short when the demon weapons finally arrive at the theater, but since the Mikasa isn't ready for takeoff yet, Ogami and Sakura have no choice but to hold them off, even though they're wildly outnumbered. That's when Ultimate Bro Kayama comes in with the save, holding them back until the Mikasa can take off, while Ogami and Sakura get to safety. The Mikasa is finally ready to depart, and boy, if you thought the launch sequence in the first game was some nonsense, you ought to brace yourself for this one. Once we're airborne, it's time to formulate a plan of attack. Musashi's defenses are impenetrable, so the only way we're gonna do any damage against it is to infiltrate it and destroy it from the inside out. How will we do this? By jamming the Mikasa right into its creepy fucking craw. In fact, this is such a good plan that the enemy decides to try it themselves, sending a horde of demon weapons into the Mikasa's vents to destroy its engines. Thus, our first combat mission begins in the Mikasa's engine rooms, as we fight off the would-be intruders. We can only bring 4 squad mates with us to start, and personally, I'd recommend prioritizing offense for this mission. The map is huge, the enemies are many, and your goal is to defend the engines, so you'll want your heavy hitters tagging along to wipe them all out ASAP. Even though it's game over if all the engines get destroyed, it's impossible to save all of them, so don't sweat it too hard. Still, you'll want to keep as many intact as you can, for reasons that will soon be apparent. After taking out all the enemies, it's time to fight Tsuchigumo once more, but this time, there's a rather obnoxious twist. Her mech will change color every turn, indicating a change in the fight's mechanics. There's her default yellow, where the fight operates as it normally does. Then there's white, where every attack she receives heals her instead of damages her. Finally, there's purple, where every attack she receives increases her attack stat by 2 at a time. What's more, the engine room is flooded with more enemies, and with Ogami's team being cut off, this is where the 4 other members come into play. The reinforcement demons won't stop coming either, so your priority is to defeat Tsuchigumo as fast as possible, while defending whichever engines are still intact. Tsuchigumo still hits hard, so you'll want to take advantage of her white turns and use them to heal up. Otherwise, switch into fire mode and dump as much damage as you can on her, even if she's in purple mode. Once defeated, she escapes, once again. But we don't have any time to relax before the demon weapons begin assaulting the deck of the Mikasa, railroading us directly into yet another combat mission. While the last mission was deceptively simple, this one is easily the hardest mission thus far. The Mikasa is besieged by demon weapons, and an attempt is made to reach a high enough altitude so that the demons can't follow the ship. There's a big honkin' vent in the middle, and once more than 7 demons get inside, it's game over. What's more, the map is big, and there are multiple waves coming in from all sides. There are friendly turrets to help out, but if too many get destroyed, the reinforcement waves get even bigger. That makes this mission a juggling act of defeating the demons, protecting the turrets, and protecting the vent. You'll want to carefully alternate between fire and wind modes as the situation calls for it, and conserve your super attacks for when you really need them, as this mission can go on for quite some time. After much strife, we finally reached a safe altitude, but, surprise, who else should show up but Tsuchigumo? Again.
Why won't you die?
This time, she intends to jump in the vent herself, and if she makes it in, it's game over. What's more, after your first turn, the Tenbu all start acting up, so time is of the essence. Have Ogami shield the love interest and, using wind mode to create some distance between themselves and the rest of the squad, have the 2 of them bait Tsuchigumo's super attack, nullifying it in the process. Have the others get close and take potshots at her until Ogami can shift into fire mode, at which point a non-stop flurry of super moves should put her down for good. For real this time. She gives the Flower Division her sob story, explaining she's actually a human just like them, and she was despised by her peers for her unusual number of arms. Kyogoku gave her the means to seek revenge against the humans, and so she followed his every command. She then explodes and dies, without a single regret for her actions. There's no time to be sad about her cruel fate though, because the Tenbu are still on the fritz, and we really gotta find out what's up. Back in the Mikasa's command center, Koran explains what's wrong with the Tenbu. On top of harnessing the spirit energy of its pilots like normal spherical armors, the Tenbu also siphon city energy from the Earth, the same type of energy referenced in the first game to explain why the theater is built where it is. The invocation of the seal of 8 demonic gates has unleashed massive quantities of city energy into the air, overloading the Tenbu and putting a strain on their pilots. Thankfully, Koran's got our backs, as she's loaded some spare Kobu aboard the Mikasa for just such an occasion, naturally. They might not be as strong as the Tenbu, but Koran figures that everyone's grown since the last time they rode the Kobu, so they should suffice for the battles ahead. What's more, Orihime and Reni now have Kobu of their very own, and Flower Division uniforms to match. Now that the mech problem has been dealt with and they don't have to worry about demon weapon attacks, the assault on Musashi can proceed as planned. However, Yoneda keeps it real with everyone and tells them that the odds of their survival are slim, putting everyone on edge. Ogami has 1 hour before the plan is put into motion, and during that time, he visits every one of his squad mates, helping to calm their nerves and assuage their fears, as well as share a tender moment with Koran. The hour passes, and the attack on Musashi is about to begin, when Yoneda reveals the second half of the plan. Remember that sword he entrusted Ogami with way back in Chapter 4? It, along with Ayame's sword, Yamazaki's sword, and the sword Sakura inherited from her father, are all used in a ritual called the Rite of Four Swords, which, when performed successfully, can seal away demonic forces. In the Demon War 8 years prior, the Rite of Four Swords ended in failure, resulting in Colonel Shinguji, Sakura's father, using the Majinki and sacrificing himself to finish the job. However, Yoneda has faith that Ogami and Sakura can succeed, where he and the former task force failed, entrusting the two of them to carry out the ritual themselves. Yoneda then initiates the charge on Musashi, and after they've made direct contact, the ship is somehow still in flying shape. As the others head down to their Kobu to deploy, Kaede stops Ogami and asks him to promise something. She asks him to promise that nobody will die, that everyone will come back home safely, recounting how Ayame never made it back from the assault on Seimu Castle.
死んではダメ。死んでもいいなんて絶対に考えてはダメ。
When Ogami makes his promise, Kaede finally entrusts him with her sister's former sword. All that's left to perform the rite and destroy Musashi is to reclaim Yamazaki's sword, which, as you may recall, Onio took from him at the end of Chapter 1. With the squad having made their way inside, it's time for yet another combat mission. And even though we've been stripped of the Tembu, the Kobu can still keep up, just as Koran theorized. The map features 3 giant cannons that are impervious to direct attacks. The only way they can be destroyed is if you stomp on the power source at the base of each tower. Each tower also features an enemy spawner that'll pop out a new demon weapon every turn. Destroy all the towers, spawners, and enemies to clear the mission. For this one, you'll want to switch to win mode in order to get to each tower as quickly as possible. All it takes is planting a Kobu right on top of each panel, so you don't even need your heavy hitters to take them out, just whoever gets there fastest. That being said, every unit now has a new super, most of which deal more damage with wider areas of effect, so you won't be hurting for firepower. Before you do anything though, bring Ogami and your love interest to the center of the arena and activate your team-up attack. The team-up attack has also been upgraded. It too features upgraded range and damage, but most importantly...
うわ、なんやこれ。
気に入ってもらえたかな。
おおきに、大切にするで。
君に送る愛の人形。All I need.
That's the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Anyway, after clearing out a fair chunk of the map with the power of love, split the party into groups to clear out the towers and take out the spawners. It's ultimately a pretty painless mission. If you thought that was too easy though, don't worry. Here comes Kongo to slap your shit in. Because this fight with him is one of the hardest in the game. He can easily take you out if you're not careful. There are 2 wrinkles to this fight that make it so much harder than our last few encounters with Bulk Vanderhuge. First, by exerting his ki, he's weakened the entire Flower Division, reducing their action limit to a mere 1 action per turn. Second, his usual gaggle of golden Wakiji are hanging around, but one of them's taken after Ogami and will shield Crunch Buttsteak from all damage. The ideal strategy here is to shift into mountain mode to turtle up. Your decreased number of actions per turn means you'll have to forego guarding most turns, so shifting into fire or wind mode is downright suicidal. Get Ogami and his love interest into position as close to the pack of Wakiji as possible, then give them another Love Tenkyoken to defeat them all. Alas, Roll Fizzlebeef will inevitably get caught in the blast, meaning the lone shielding Wakiji will cover him and neither will be harmed. At this point, try to box Kongo in, as he's quite squirrely, while taking out the problematic drone on its own. With the final Wakiji gone, Smoke Man Muscle is defenseless, so it's time once more for everyone to dump their supers on him. Careful, methodical fighting will ensure he goes down without causing any casualties, but not before he gives us an ominous warning about Kyogoku's power. You fought well. Now rest in peace, Bob Johnson.
Well, anyway, got that out of my system.
Meanwhile, the crew of the Mikasa have retreated to safety, and they soon receive a transmission from Ogami telling them that contact will be impossible past this point. The crew can do nothing but pray for their success, as we finally enter the final chapter. Not even a minute in, and we finally meet with Onio, and Sakura tries one last time to snap him out of it and return him to his former self, but neither her nor Ogami's attempts to talk to him bear any result. Reni, speaking from experience, tells them that he is under the control of a powerful force, and that only an even greater power can hope to break him out of it, but until then, all they can do is fight him. While this fight isn't nearly as tricky as Kongo's, Onio does still have a few tricks up his sleeve. He'll call upon the fallen members of the Black Oni to lend him their power, starting with Suiko's clone technique. Thankfully, the same trick as before still works, so you can still pinpoint which is the real one and plan accordingly. However, Onio's super attack is identical to Sakura's at this point, where it'll extend across the map with a 3-tile width, so you'll want to hide your units behind these constantly shifting pillars until he uses it up. You'll then want to use your team-up attack to clear out all the clones, then box him in and finish him off. However, if he manages to survive, he'll start using other Black Oni techniques, such as Mokujiki's mini-drones, and run off to recover his health. If this happens, shift into win mode and catch up to him to finish him off, before the fight gets any hairier. During the fight, Sakura keeps trying to talk Onio out of his mind control, and once he's defeated, he finally begins to waver. And after a final push, he finally breaks free. After 8 years, Kazuma and Sakura are finally reunited as father and daughter, enjoying a touching moment together before Kyogoku shows up to piss in their cornflakes. He reasons that you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, and unleashes the totality of his power at the Flower Division, only for Kazuma to jump in front and take the hit himself. As he holds the blast at bay, he tells Sakura how to foil Kyogoku's plans, and bids farewell to his daughter.
Sakura, 迷いのないいい剣を使うようになった。
お父様、そんなの嫌。
ほんの少しだけだが、父としてお前と話せてよかった。さくら、母さんによろしく伝えてくれ。
お父様
Kyogoku is taken back at how Kazuma managed to neutralize his attack, and makes a hasty, strategic retreat. Grief-stricken by losing her father all over again, Sakura nevertheless keeps it together, and together with Ogami, performs the rite of 4 swords, shattering the crystal controlling the demon weapons and putting an end to their assault on Tokyo. All that remains now is to defeat Kyogoku and sink Musashi for good. The Flower Division enter a chamber full of strange glowing pillars, all of which are controlling the flow of energy throughout Musashi. Kyogoku shows up to reveal a slight setback for our heroes. The demon weapons may have been rendered inert outside, but within Musashi, they remain fully operational. It's now a race to destroy all the pillars, as Kyogoku keeps summoning reinforcements every turn. Shift into win mode and split the team up once again to divide and conquer. While you're doing this, pay close attention to the color of the pillars. Every turn, different pillars will start flashing pink, meaning they are full of more energy than usual. In this state, they are much easier to destroy than they usually are, so plan your attack usage accordingly. Prioritize super attacks for the normal green ones, but stick to basic attacks for the pink ones. Once all the smaller pillars are taken care of, Ogami and crew rally up around the gigantic last pillar, and with their powers combined, they finally cut Musashi off from its energy supply. Well, maybe. The team can still feel a powerful source of evil energy up ahead, and following it leads them to an enormous mech, piloted by none other than Kyogoku, named Shinno, which he claims is the ancient throne of the gods themselves. He prattles on a bit about his ideals, and tempting though it is to slam the shut the fuck up button and skip right ahead to the fight, we're going to listen to him go on a bit more so that we can actually make sense of his overall goal. As it turns out, the true Tokyo that Kyogoku seeks to establish is one where humans and demons can coexist. Kyogoku explains that the demons sealed away beneath Tokyo are actually vengeful, evil spirits given form, much like Musashi itself, and that Tokyo was built using their energy, in the form of city energy. Kyogoku proclaims that a society built with such power is inherently tainted and must be cleansed, and that he's the only guy fit for the job. Since Musashi also relies on city energy, everyone immediately calls him out for being a hypocrite, to which Kyogoku, no shit, goes, "No, it's different when I do it, shut up!" And with that wet fart of a justification, we finally enter the climax. Kyogoku awaits us at the top of this platform, but to get to him, we'll have to go through one last bunch of demon weapons, plus these weird little root things. The map is divided into 3 levels, and these roots will damage every single friendly unit on the same level as it. And though it's not a ton of damage, you don't want it to add up, so take them out ASAP. Thankfully, by performing a team-up attack in the very center of the second level, you should be able to wipe out most of the roots and demon weapons in one fell swoop, letting you focus on Kyogoku. What's more, Kyogoku's mech, Shinno, can't actually move, at least not yet. You can literally park right next to him, and so long as you're not in his attack range, he's powerless to stop you. So now's a good opportunity to recharge your health and super meter. This glowing red thing is his weak point, but with his big meaty claws in the way, you won't be doing much damage. What you'll have to do is enter his attack range, at which point he'll raise said claw in order to deal a devastating attack the following turn. So you'll need to shift into fire mode and take his weak spot out with all the supers you've got before that can happen. Naturally, seeing as this is the final boss, the battle is far from over. In his moment of apparent defeat, Kyogoku is possessed by the spirit of Shinno itself, and the mech's true power is unleashed. We finally get to gaze on Shinno's true form and... Aw, he's a little snail. But seriously though, this dude packs a real punch, and to make matters even more frustrating, he has a nasty tendency to switch back and forth between 2 positions on the map multiple times per turn. You can only damage Shinno right in the middle of his snail shell, so pick one of the 2 sides to set your units up at, arranging them all so they can attack his weak point from where they're standing. Since he only ever shows up in 2 places, you don't want to waste any of your actions by moving if you don't have to. You might be tempted to move out of his way though, because his attack power can be devastating. Now, this might sound crazy, but you must unlearn what you have learned, and not shield anybody. That's right. Let Ogami and everyone on the team take the full brunt of each attack. This will deal significant damage, especially from his super attack, but you'll gain just as much super meter in return. And so long as Iris is in a position where her heal super reaches everyone, you can power through each attack and turn the battle into a continuous stream of super attacks. Once you destroy Shinno's snail butt, you'll enter Phase 3, where you once again have to contend with his big, meaty claws! The left side claw deals more damage, whereas the right side claw has higher defense. And all the while, Shinno will spit out mini-drones several times per turn. Unlike Mokujiki or even Onio's mini-drones, these ones deal decent damage individually, so if they start piling up, they can quickly become very dangerous. Focus on Shinno while dispatching the drones as needed, and once his health is depleted, Shinno will attempt to coax your love interest to the dark side.
お前を認めよう。力こそが全て。お前の力こそ求めし者。来い、女。この神能のもとへ。
あんた、分かってへん。みんながおるから、うちは戦える。大事な人がおるから、その人の笑顔があるから、うちは戦えるんや。行こう、大神藩。2人ででっかい花火打ち上げよう。
Once she tells him to fuck off, you'll enter the final phase of the fight. He may not have claws or his snail butt anymore, but don't count him out just yet, because his final super move deals devastating damage. If you manage to survive that, shift into fire mode and let loose with all the free super meter that last attack gave you, and he should finally go down without much more trouble. With Shino defeated, Kyogoku himself regains control, and despite the body snatching, he doesn't seem terribly apologetic, insisting on dragging you to hell with him.
どんなに苦しい戦いでも自分自身の力と
愛する心を信じて戦う。そして勝利をつかむまで僕たちは決して負けない。それが帝国歌劇団だぜ。
俺たちは正義だ。
絶対正義帝国歌劇団。
It's not a giant hype laser into space, but it'll do. Musashi starts to crumble, and it looks as though the Flower Division won't make it out in time. When the Mikasa suddenly breaks through and comes to the rescue.
あんまり遅いから迎えに来てやったぞ。
上官。
Musashi returns from whence it came, and the day is finally saved. Plus, as promised, nobody had to die this time. When comparing the final chapter of this game and the last game, I find they're pretty evenly matched. Though the utter lunacy of the plot twists in the first game's finale have yet to be topped here, the combat sequences and boss fights are far more engaging. Whereas you were still using the shield mechanic as a crutch by the time the final boss of the first game came around, the way the final boss encounter is designed in 2 actively discourages using it, making the battle far more tense and methodical. Still, I do miss that laser. Another change that 2 makes is that, well, the game's not actually over. Not just yet. Instead, after a brief scene of life in Tokyo returning to normal, you get a moment to just go around the theater and talk to everyone. No action limit or anything, just wander around and have one last conversation with everybody. It's nice to have this sort of denouement where you can just take all the time you want to savor the moment before the game ends, rather than be railroaded straight to the ending like the first game. Once you're good and ready, meet up with your love interest and you'll finally get your ending.
どうしたんだろう。
さあ、きっと整備不良やな。
The credits begin to play, again a nice montage of story moments with your love interest, as well as some cute original art. But you remember the battle rankings I mentioned way earlier? Well, once the credits end, if you passed a minimum threshold for total rankings, you get your special reward. Sadness! In a bonus mini-chapter, Ogami and his love interest, in this case Koran, get called into Yoneda's office. Yoneda has 2 big pieces of news to share with them. First, Ogami's no longer an ensign. He's been promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Junior Grade, thanks to his track record of minimizing casualties in combat. Second, as a result of this, he's being sent off to study abroad in Paris on behalf of the military, meaning he'll have to leave the theater and the Flower Division behind for an indeterminate amount of time. Koran tries to put on a brave face and be supportive, but she just can't do it. 1 week later, Ogami gives his goodbyes to everyone in a farewell party, and the night before he ships off to France, Koran hands him a letter, asking him not to open it until he's on the boat. Early the next morning, Kayama catches Ogami trying to sneak off on his own, surmising he's trying to avoid upsetting the girls, and bids him farewell. Once he arrives at the shipyard, Ogami is about to board the boat, when all of a sudden, Sakura Wars 2 is a phenomenal game. It's everything you could hope for from a sequel to the first game. All the gameplay systems are enhanced and refined for the better. The biggest gameplay flaw is a meter you can easily ignore. Conversations are more engaging and rewarding, exploration is encouraged, combat is more layered and intricate, and there's a massive amount of replay value thanks to the variable mission objectives and sheer volume of unique, romance-dependent scenes. It's a significantly longer game than the first one, too, clocking in at over 30 hours compared to the first game's 20, and yet it never feels bloated or overstuffed. It's wonderfully paced, knowing how to balance intense combat encounters with laid-back hangouts with the squad. You get so much more time to get to know the characters, and they're given way more opportunities to interact with each other. Orihime and Reni are great additions to the core cast, both of them adding their own distinct flavor and dynamics, and both of them having satisfying arcs. And I've already rambled at length about how much I love Kayama. Even the villains get so much more to work with, all of them having more screen time than the villains of the first game. It also helps that, unlike the first game, we actually get to see the villains talk to each other more than once. We get to see them butt heads, conspire, and occasionally even show affection for one another. Of course, that isn't to say the game is perfect, it still has its flaws. As good as the villain team in this game is on the whole, Kyogoku is kind of weak as the big bad. His goals are paper thin, and as much as I love that the game gives you the option to ignore his big monologue, listening to it isn't terribly enlightening anyway. Sure, Satan in the first game wasn't the most nuanced or complex villain, but at least he had an excuse. He was the actual fucking devil. He was pretty much just doing his job. For Kyogoku, we have nothing to really go off of. We're told he's the descendant of a powerful spirit medium, but otherwise we have no background to latch onto, nothing that informs his character and why he might act out in this way. No real motivation beyond Tokyo is tainted. He was frankly more interesting when he was still just a fascist. At least that gave him a more tangible motivation, an actual ideal with a real-world basis, rather than the vague ideals he keeps mouthing off about. He doesn't become any more compelling when he's possessed by the will of Shinno either. Sure, Onio is the bigger focus, what with him being the Darth Vader to Kyogoku's Palpatine, but in Star Wars, they didn't kill Vader an hour before Palpatine was defeated. Like, imagine how boring it would be if the final battle in Star Wars didn't have Vader at all, and it was just a fight against Palpatine. Oh, right! Aside from Kyogoku, and the Rose Division, I've already said my piece about them. If there's anything I could complain about, it's probably how your love interest gets totally sidelined during the final chapter. Remember what I said last time about how Sakura Wars 2's implementation of romance was an improvement in most ways, but a step back in others? This is pretty much what I was talking about. In the first game's final chapter, your love interest becomes the de facto heroine, but here, no matter who you pick, the plot is centered primarily on Sakura. The few things this game does give your love interest to do make more sense if your love interest is Sakura too. For instance, when Shinno tries to bring your love interest over to the dark side, it makes way more sense for him to pull that stunt on Sakura, the daughter of Onio, who was the strongest of Kyogoku's underlings. Him trying to pull that on Koran just feels like it comes out of nowhere, like it's the game just throwing her a bone because she didn't get to be all that important this time around. It's pretty much just this game too. The other mainline entries up to 5 do a much better job of giving your love interest a pivotal role in the final chapter, even if that doesn't necessarily mean she gets to be the heroine. Ultimately though, that's kind of it. Any further complaints would just be minor nitpicks or things the sequels expanded upon but don't negatively impact this game. Sakura Wars 2 is such a tight, solid package, with compelling gameplay, plenty of variety, and a whole ensemble of lovable characters. If the first game was a worn down but comfy sweater, then this one's a big, fluffy bathrobe, making you feel nice and toasty all over. Sakura Wars 2 is one of the best games on the Saturn, rivaling even the strongest games the system had to offer. But what if I told you it only got better from here? That its sequel, Sakura Wars 3, was an even better game. But before we can join Ogami on his European excursion, we'll need to make a few quick detours to the land of spin-off games.
大神は注意小心なんやってな。ほんまおめでとう。でも急にパリに行ってしまうやなんて寂しいな。なあ、パリってどんな街なんやろ。すごい発明なんかあるんやろか。花の都パリ、世界の中心パリ。あー、憧れるわ。できることなら大神藩と一緒にパリを探検してみたかったわ。そや、うちの新しい夢はな、飛行機作ることなんや。世界一周無着陸飛行できる飛行機や。もし完成したら追いかけるわ。それで大神藩をさらって世界一周大空の旅をするんや。あかん、またしょうもないこと言うてしもたわ。せやけどどんな夢もそれに向かって努力せんと実現せえへんもんな。うち頑張るで。大神藩も頑張ってな。体に気ぃつけて。いつの日かまた帝国歌劇団花組リコーラン